we're really honored to be here with you this morning and see this beautiful place you've created. And we'd just like to get some insight as to how you actually developed this and get a little bit of history about the evolution of the garden and anything else you'd like to share with us this morning.
Oh, well, thank you, Nancy. I'm very happy to be here and honored to share my garden with you this morning. This is my first time ever being interviewed, so a little nervous, but I think it'll go well.
Did you do a lot of research when you moved into this home to determine what your starting point would be or how you would actually tackle it? Because I'm assuming, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that this property most likely had a lot of turf and the typical landscape that most of the yards in this area would have.
Absolutely. We're fortunate that we live in an older suburban neighborhood, so the lots are a little bit larger than they are today. In fact, it's about 3,300 square feet of yard for the Japanese garden.
Okay. So it was helpful to you to not only do the research, but then on the other side, you had to really do some thought and work to create something that would be sustainable in this environment. In other words, things that would be more adapted, natives and low water use type plants that you could bring into the garden and that would survive and thrive.
Well, absolutely. Let me preface that by saying when we moved into the home, we were very fortunate that there was pretty much nothing here except for a dying St. Augustine lawn, and there were two trees, a Chinese pistache and a Texas red oak, and a 50-year-old Nandina.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So, and I've kept all three of those trees, and so it was really great because I kind of had a blank slate to work with. I didn't have my soil tested, but from digging in the soil, it was kind of a nice, rich, crumbly brown soil, and we have good drainage here too. So I didn't have to amend the soil as much as some San Antonians, because as you know, we have different types of soils throughout the city.
Right.
The northern side, is pretty much rock, and then the southern side is a little bit more sandy. So also the soils in San Antonio tend to be quite alkaline, but ours here is more on the neutral side, which is really beneficial for the plants. When I first started gardening, I wasn't really aware of that need for real water conserving plants. It was only after I got involved with different organizations like GTVST, the Rainbow Garden Club, and the Bexar County Master Gardeners. In fact, I completed that class in 2009, and that was really helpful.
It is. Well, congratulations on accomplishing that.
Oh, thanks.
Can you give us an idea? Did it have a sprinkler system in the yard that you had to do any conversion with, or can you give us some idea of what it's taken as far as some kind of reduction maybe in your watering of the landscape, or exactly how you achieved making all these plants thrive?
Sure. We actually did have an existing sprinkler system. Wasn't the best one. It was poorly designed in my opinion.
Original? Old?
Yes. Originally it was put in the early to mid 80s, and it was the old kind that popped up and shot water like all throughout the yard, and it was just pretty inefficient. So in my gardening training, I was made aware of the importance of drip irrigation, and I had not really known much about that, but we decided to convert over 75% of the sprinkler system to drip, and that's been a lifesaver as far as on the water bills. Plus it, delivers water directly to the plant roots.
Right.
And that's where they need it, rather than the foliage.
And I've noticed you're incorporating a lot of mulch around your plants.
Yes, the use of heavy mulch does several things. It holds in moisture for the plants, it reduces weed growth, and it just provides, as it breaks down, it provides some nutrients for the plants. So almost all the beds are heavily mulched, and that's taken some time and
I
effort.
can imagine, yes.
But it really is worth it. It pays off.
And in what year did you actually start working on this, so that we get some kind of grasp as to how long it took you to make this this change in your yard this way?
Sure. We first started planning out the garden we moved here in December of 2009, and it was the very next year in 2010 that myself, my partner, and my children, who were young at the time, we had a big load of gravel delivered at the street side, and we shoveled gravel for weeks and making basically the gravel sea. I knew that from the beginning I did not want a pond. I've known several people that have had ponds, and they told me that they were very high maintenance, and they usually ended up ripping them out.
Okay.
So that was one of my first decisions, was to not use any water features really in the garden. And in Japanese gardens, there's three main things that are very important: water, plants, and stone. So, but if you can't have water, then you can have the imitation of it by using the gravel or a sand to represent the water.
So you use a lot of symbolism within the garden.
Absolutely. A lot of symbolism. And this requires a little bit of part on the viewer to use their imagination. So to interpret things, such as a certain tree that's shaped in a certain way may represent some of the trees that are windswept in Japan. So Japan itself, it's a string of islands, and they're quite long. So the southern end of Japan is fairly tropical, and they use a lot of cycads. And then the northern end is where they get a lot of snow.
Okay.
So I designed this garden not so much in the tropical sense, because the backyard is more tropical. So I haven't really used any palm trees or cycads, although in some Japanese gardens you would definitely see those. When I first started the garden in 2010 and started arranging the plants, they were all so small, you know, and I had trouble envisioning their mature size. So I tended to overplant. And also, I'm a plant collector by nature, so that creates a problem sometimes in designing gardens, in wanting to have one of everything, because it can kind of create a chaotic or a hodgepodge look. But with a Japanese garden, you can get away with it a little bit more, because many of the different trees and shrubs are viewed as specimens. Now, I have planted, you know, some shrubs and trees in multiple. Also, the Japanese use asymmetry a lot, and they plant in multiples of 3s, 5s, 7s, and so there's certain plants that I've done that with to help bring a little bit of a cohesiveness to the garden, and like dwarf Yopon hollies, podocarpus, African lilies. And so as you're walking through the garden, you know, you'll be seeing this wide variety of plants, but then you'll see a plant that you recognize before.
Okay.
And so that helps, like, oh, I've seen that plant before, and it kind of brings a little bit of more of peacefulness to the garden.
Well, is there a similarity in our climate and environment to what you would find in Japan?
No. Absolutely not.
So this has been a struggle to develop.
Yes, it has. And I would argue that, you know, you don't really see many Japanese gardens in San Antonio. So, but it's definitely achievable for any gardener if they're willing to put in the effort in upkeep of the garden. When I first started, I kind of convinced myself that the upkeep of the Japanese garden really wasn't that much, but it really is. It kind of is a little bit time intensive.
Well, I know there are different styles within your garden here, and we're excited to get in and actually start touring with you, but before we do that, maybe you'd like to kind of give us an idea of what we'll be seeing.
Sure. The garden is designed in several different styles, and I kind of drew that from my visits to Japanese gardens here in North America. I've been to actually almost 50, but that doesn't make me an expert by any means. I mostly was there just like we are today, visitors, and just taking in the beauty of the garden. One of the first styles that I created was the dry garden, right up next to the house. It kind of hugs the house, and it's meant to be viewed sometimes from the house, or also from a slightly elevated position, such as we are today on the viewing pavilion.
Okay.
So this allows you to look a little bit down into the garden to give you some perspective, and I think it's worked out really well. The garden did at one point, in fact fairly recently, become overgrown, because I had mentioned to you before that when I planted all these little plants, they were like 1 foot apart, and then they grew into like 3 or 4 feet tall plants. So I'm sure this is a common mistake.
I think so.
Among gardeners, and so it became quite an overgrown jungle. So, but on one hand, it kind of helped me, because then a lot of the specimens were kind of like more mature, and then I was able to cut out the ones that didn't fit.
Okay.
And as a gardener too, that was a little difficult.
I'm sure, to see some of these go.
We always want to save every plant that we have,
Yes.
and but sometimes you have to bite the bullet and take out the ones that aren't working for you in the garden. So, and that's what I did. We did a major renovation of the garden in just January of this year.
Okay.
In addition to the dry landscape, we have what I call an approach garden, and then we also have the tea garden,
Okay.
which is the largest of the styles. It basically outskirts the perimeter of the property, and then it ends in a small courtyard garden. So the courtyard garden style and the tea garden overlap a little bit in the fact that the tea house is at the end,
Okay.
and then but it is a deck more than a house, and it overlooks a very small dry garden, and it's more of a meditative, contemplative type garden.
Well, I guess one additional question comes to mind for the novice gardener. Would the majority of the plants that you have in the garden be easily accessible, acquirable locally, or did you have to look and search for these mail order, or did you get most of them here?
Yeah, I got most of them here.
Okay.
Now, there's several gardens in town that have a great variety of native plants. One of those being Rainbow Gardens, both on Bandera Road and on Thousand Oaks.
Okay.
Ronnie, the owner at the one on Thousand Oaks, is extremely knowledgeable. And I think that that's one important thing for the novice gardener to kind of find, is someone who's extremely knowledgeable about plants, how they do in this area, and they'll be upfront with you, say, give it a try, it may work, it may not, or they can tell you, like, well, this is a definite go, a brown thumb couldn't kill this. So
I guess the lesson learned here from what you've said this morning is to not only look at the size of what you're purchasing, but also look at what the mature size will be when you start planning and planting.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's one of the mistakes I made as a novice gardener, was not taking into account the mature size of the plant. Another, probably I would say the biggest mistake I made was in covering the entire lawn with that weed fabric.
Okay.
The landscaping fabric. I have spent the last year ripping all of that out. The only place I've kept it is under the gravel or under the pathways. But it's really bad for the soil. It basically kills the soil. It does allow water to go through, but it doesn't allow the nutrients to go through, or any of that
microbial
activity.
Right.
It's so important for the health of the plants.
Right.
So I would suggest for gardeners who are trying to deter weeds or make beds, you can use newspaper, or you can even use cardboard boxes, and those will deteriorate much more quickly than the landscape fabric. In fact, the landscape fabric that I had here was over 10 years old, and it was practically in the same condition as when I put it in.
So there was no breakdown with it?
No, so that was kind of scary. And the plants have already kind of done much better since I've ripped that out. So.
Well, it's a beautiful garden, and I think we need to start looking and sharing with all the viewers so that they can appreciate exactly what you've done here, Jeffrey.
That sounds great, Nancy. I look forward to it.